There are two things that happen a lot in Wizards and Warriors for the NES. One of them is dying. The other is falling. Oftentimes, they may relate to each other, but for the most part, each of them sucks. Wizards and Warriors is a difficult little platformer created by the now defunct Acclaim. It also has Rare's name on there as well. Now, the opening title screen looks pretty promising. A knight holding two swords faces off against two other soldiers. The problem is that never in the game do you get to wield two swords. It's probably best that way because the warrior you play as, he's not a very good swordsman. He flails the sword around like he doesn't have a clue on how to use it. In fact, the best way to actually kill your enemies is to jump. If something touches your sword when you jump, it takes damage. And sadly, this is the best way to kill bosses if you don't have the throwing dagger. Perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself, and I should start with the storyline of the game. You play as Kuros, a knight of the kingdom going after the cliched princess who got kidnapped. Malka is the opposing force here, and he has a bunch of nasty demons going after you. Those demons consist of your standard flying behemoths and skeletons, but don't forget about the bats and spiders. But of course, those demons all fall to your sword. Well, when you hit them, that is. There's a few reasons why the combat seems to fall short. First off, the controls can feel a bit loose at times. This is especially felt when hopping around on extremely narrow platforms. You aren't given very much leeway when jumping around, but sometimes when attacking, the sword just doesn't seem to reach far enough. The other reason why combat is a bit difficult is just because of the massive amounts of enemies that appear on the screen at one time. Couple this with not being able to hit things very well, and fighting the enemies can be a trying affair. Enemies often take more than one bar of life with each hit, and health power-ups don't seem to assist you very much. Once you get the throwing dagger, you get a major boost in attack though. There's also one gigantic pro of the game. You get infinite continues. What's even better is that when you continue, you start exactly where you started. This gives you a much better chance of actually finishing the game. Thankfully, as you run around the world, there's a few chests thrown around that contain some helpful loot. These chests, along with doors, are opened with colored keys. These keys come in three flavors: pink, blue, and red. These keys open up similarly colored chests and doors. Often, the chests carry a variety of treasure. Many times they'll contain about 15 gems or so. Other times, it may contain a piece of equipment. For example, you have a selection of staves that do things such as freeze the enemy or do some damage. You can get the boots of force, which allow you to do some kicking, which can force chests open if you don't have the key. Or, you can kick the enemies to do some damage. You can also get a feather that allows you to levitate or slow down your fall. This comes incredibly useful later in the game, and fortunately, once you gain those feathers, you won't ever lose them. Some weapons stay with you, but others are switched when picking up a new one. There's an odd trick to this though. In order to use the boots or a staff, you press select. It's a bit awkward at first, but after a while you do get used to it. There's really not much use for it though, as the staves are nice, but a bit weak. The kicking is sweet, but the range is about as much as the sword, and you might just prefer to use the throwing dagger anyway. I mentioned gems, and although they seem to be primarily used to help with your score, there is a minimum gem pickup that you'll need to complete each level. If you don't have it, a strange red knight will be blocking the exit door. He'll display how many gems you need to finish the stage, so until you get them, you should stay clear. There's several ways to get these jewels. First, they're strewn all over the place. Second, creatures will often drop them. The third way is in the chests, which will give you the best amounts of gems at one go. Finally, there's secret doors that contain a bunch of gems. These are a bit harder to find, but can pay off quite well. When you're not killing things or collecting gems, you're maneuvering the land, which is part of the problem with the game. You also need to find the gems, but need to do a bit of backtracking or exploring to find them. This normally isn't a problem in the first few stages, but after a few levels, you're going to start getting frustrated with the jumping. It's especially noticeable in the final castle stage, where you're trying to climb the castle walls. The bricks are about an inch long, which don't give you much of a foothold. Along that is the problem with that the bricks are constantly retracting into the wall, so falling becomes a constant threat. Thankfully, falling doesn't do any damage, but it's annoying when you start getting far and then just drop down to the beginning again. At this point in the game, or possibly even starting on the stage prior, Wizards and Warriors starts losing its touch as an action game, and seems to focus more on the platforming. If the controls weren't so slippery, it probably wouldn't have been so bad, but the narrow platforms just make it impossible to navigate well. Granted, it's not even close to the awfulness of Linus Spacehead, but it can still make you wonder. Now, all my bitching about the combat and platforming doesn't mean that this is a bad game. For one, some of the animations are pretty funny. Best of all is the death animation, where he just falls to the ground with his leg just dangling there. I don't know why, but I laughed a few times when this occurred. Secondly, the music isn't too bad. Sure, it's repetitive after a while, but for the most part it's well done, with a mysterious air to it. The only issue I have with the music is that when you get down to about 3 bars of life, it changes to warn you that you're about to die. But, strangely, it sounds kind of upbeat, like, hooray, you're about to bite the dust. I have no idea why it's so happy sounding. I actually enjoyed it at first, but it starts to wear at you after a while. Don't worry, you'll be hearing it a lot. Finally, let's move on to the bosses. Sadly, they can be pretty brutal. First, they have a pretty obvious pattern to them, but it's still difficult to hit them without taking damage yourself. Because of this, the dagger will be your best friend. After a few stages, the boss will transform into a bunch of ghosts, which need to be dispatched to finally finish the stage. After killing a boss, you just save a fair maiden that happens to be strung up on a cavern roof. You then move on to the next level. There's also a glitch that I read about that I had to try. Basically, it involves using the feather to hover indefinitely, and since you're hovering just outside the boss's reach, they'll take damage when you won't. The problem with this is that when I did this to defeat a boss, that was mainly just to try it, the game totally messed up and wouldn't open up the door. Without a password system, I would have had to start the entire game over. Fuck. I guess that's what I get for trying to cheat my way through a boss battle. Wizards & Warriors isn't the best platformer out there, but it's still got a bit of charm. If you play it, be prepared to die and fall a lot. There's 2 sequels on the NES I'll have to touch at one point, but as always, that must remain for another day. Final score? 6 out of 10. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.